The day the balance finally hits zero, you have not won. I know that is not what you want to hear at the end of a series about getting out of debt, but I would be doing you a disservice if I ended it anywhere else. Zero is not a victory. Zero is a starting line, the one everybody else began at. And what you do in the 90 days after you cross it decides whether the last few years were a detour or a turning point. Today we close the loop, and then we cut it open. Here is the plan for the finale. First, the whole loop in one frame. 6 mechanisms, 1 circle, and the 2 households from episode 1 come back to make the point one last time. Then 6 beats. 1. The recap, all 6 mechanisms in a single picture. 2. Zero is a zero, not a win. 3. The behaviors that broke the cycle are the same ones that build the pile. You have already done the hard part. 4. Redirect the payment, which is the single most important idea in this video. 5. The mindset generalizes. Borrowers rent their future, owners buy it. And 6. Where to go from here with the actual next steps. Then we cut the loop open, so let us put it all together. Earn, spend, owe, stress, spend again. 6 episodes, and each one took a stop or an arrow on that circle. The glitch, the whole loop, and the discovery that income was never the variable. The scripts, the spend stop, and the rules you were handed before you could argue. The ratchet, the handoff from earn into spend, where every raise gets absorbed. The minimum payment, the OWE stop, and the anchor that turns 9 years into 48. Snowball and avalanche, the stretch into stress, where plans quietly die in month 9. And the identity switch, the return arrow, the one that makes the circle a circle. 6 mechanisms. Not one of them was arithmetic. And here are our 2 houses again, the $45,000 a year and the $250,000 a year, with the same loop over both roofs. In episode 1, that picture was there to prove that income was not the variable. Now I want it to prove something else. Look at what actually differs between those 2 households at the end of all this. It is not the income. It is not even the balance. It is which of them has changed the mechanism underneath, because the one who has can now put a much bigger number to work, and the one who has not will simply run a larger version of the same circle. Income was never the variable. But once the mechanism is fixed, income is the multiplier. That is the whole bridge to everything that comes after this series. Beat 1. Let us be honest about what these 6 mechanisms have in common, because it is the actual thesis of the series. Every single one of them was a case of your brain doing something completely reasonable in an environment it was not built for. Present bias is not a defect. It is what you want in a world where the future is genuinely uncertain and food does not keep. Spending to regulate a feeling is a functioning learning system doing its job. Inheriting your family's money rules is how humans transmit anything useful at all. Anchoring is a shortcut that saves you enormous amounts of effort 100 times a day. Not one of these is stupidity. Every one of them is a sensible mechanism meeting a system that was designed by people who understood the mechanism to point it in a particular direction. That is why the shame was always misplaced, and it is why the shame was always so expensive. You were not failing at something easy. You were running standard human equipment against an environment engineered specifically to exploit it, without ever having been told that was what was happening. Now you have been told. That is the entire value of the last 6 episodes. Not techniques, but visibility. You cannot be steered by a mechanism you can see. And that is also why I would gently push back on anyone who tells you this is all about willpower. Willpower is what you need when you cannot see the mechanism. Once you can see it, most of the work stops being effort and starts being arrangement, moving the decision earlier, removing an option, freezing a number, naming a trigger. Every practical thing in this series was of that kind. Not one of them asked you to want it more. Beat 2. 0 is not a win, and I want to be careful here because it absolutely deserves to be celebrated. If you get there, celebrate properly. It is genuinely difficult, and most people carrying a balance today will not do it. But be clear about what you have achieved. Your net worth is now nothing. not positive, nothing. You own nothing and you owe nothing, and that is the exact position the 17-year-old down the road is in, having done nothing at all. That is not meant to diminish it. It is meant to prevent the specific failure that happens next, which is that the achievement gets treated as a destination, because here is what actually happens at zero if you are not ready for it. The plan ends. The payment stops. And for the first time in years, several $100s a month appears in your account with nothing attached to it. No target, no structure, no purpose. That money is not free. It is the most dangerous money you will ever have, because it arrives at exactly the moment your discipline has been officially retired and you feel you have earned a break. That is not a cynical prediction. That is the mechanism from episode 3, waiting for you with a very large amount of newly available income. You have 90 days. Beat 3, and this is the good news, and it is bigger than people realize. Everything that builds wealth is the same set of behaviors you just used to escape debt. Look at the list. Consistent monthly contributions, regardless of how you feel about it that month. That is exactly the fixed payment from episode 4. Not touching it when things get boring. That is the boredom from episode 6, which you now know to read as success rather than failure. Continuing when a bad month happens instead of abandoning the whole thing, that is the identity that survives a setback. Not chasing the optimal version at the cost of the version you will actually run, that is the entire argument of episode 5, and it applies to investing at least as strongly. Every one of those transfers directly, which means the person standing at zero is not a beginner. They have already done the difficult part, and they did it under much worse conditions, with no compounding on their side, with stress attached to every payment, with nothing visibly growing. Building wealth with those same habits is genuinely easier, because now the machine is running in your favor instead of against you. If you can pay $400 a month towards something that only ever removes a negative, you can absolutely pay $400 a month towards something that grows. Beat 4. And this is the single most important idea in this video. Do not stop the payment. Redirect it. On the day the last balance clears, that payment, whatever it was, 400, 600, whatever number you had been sending out every month, does not go back into your life. It changes destination, and it goes somewhere that pays you instead. And here is why this works when almost nothing else does. You have already proven you can live without that money. Not theoretically, empirically, for years. The hardest part of saving or investing for most people is finding the money, and you already found it. It is currently in the account of a lender. All you are doing is changing the address on it. There is no sacrifice involved, no new tightening, no lifestyle change to negotiate with yourself. Your monthly experience of life is literally identical the day after. And notice that this is the counter ratchet from episode 3 applied at the perfect moment. You are pre-committing money before you have ever experienced it as available. It is the single easiest large financial decision most people will ever get to make, and there is a narrow window in which to make it, which is why I keep saying 90 days. Set it up the same week the balance clears. Automate it before you have had a single month of feeling rich. Beat 5. Here is the frame that generalizes everything in this series. A borrower rents their future. An owner buys it. When you borrow to live, you are selling small pieces of your future income to fund your present, and the interest is the fee you pay for that trade. It is not a moral failing, it is just an expensive direction to run the machine. When you own things, index funds, a business, anything that produces, you are doing the reverse. You are giving up small pieces of the present to buy claims on the future, and instead of paying a fee, you collect one. Same machine, same compounding, opposite direction. And that is what makes the moment at zero so important. It is the exact point where the machine is idling, and you get to choose which way it turns next. Every month after that, it turns one way or the other. There is no neutral. Either something is compounding for you or something is compounding against you. And here is the part I find genuinely encouraging. The psychological work is over. Deciding which direction the machine runs was the hard bit, and you did that when you started looking at the number instead of away from it. Everything from here is just consistency, which you have already demonstrated you have. There is one more thing worth saying about this frame, because it clears up a question people get stuck on. Is all debt bad? No. And this series has deliberately never said that. Borrowing to buy something that produces a business, an education that genuinely raises what you can earn, in some circumstances a home, is running the machine the other way, using someone else's money to buy a claim on the future. That is a completely different act from borrowing to fund a Tuesday, even though the paperwork looks similar. The distinction was never the product or the interest rate. It was always whether the thing you bought will still be paying you back after the payments stop. Beat 6. So where do you actually go from here? 3 places, and they are the rest of this channel, in the order that makes sense. If you want to know where you stand, whether your number is normal, ahead, behind, and what a realistic target looks like at your age, that is the Net Worth by Decade series, and I would start there, because a target you can see is worth more than a target you have to imagine. If your constraint is genuinely the income side, if you have fixed the mechanism and the number is simply too small for the mechanism to do much with, that is the Salary Ladder series. It walks the income bands and what actually moves you up one. And if you want to know what to do with the redirected payment, where it goes, why boring beats clever, and how the compounding actually works. That is the Compounding Machine series, and that is the direct sequel to what we just did here. That order is not arbitrary. Know where you stand, fix the income if it needs fixing, put the money to work. But if you only do one thing after this video, do not make it watching another video. Make it the redirect. Set up the transfer. Because you already know the math and you have known it the whole time. And if there is one thing this series should have taught you, it is that knowing was never the part that was missing. So let us cut it open. Here is the loop, one last time. Earn, spend, owe, stress, spend again. And here is what happens when you take a pair of scissors to the return arrow. It stops being a circle. It becomes a line, and a line has a direction, and it goes somewhere. Earn. Spend less than you earn, own the difference, and the arrow that used to send you back around now runs forward instead. That is the whole picture. That is what the last 7 episodes were for. And I want to say one more thing, because it is the part I actually care about. If you are watching this while still deep in it, the balance high, the statements unopened, none of this feeling remotely achievable. I want you to know that everything in this series is available to you right now, today, at your current income, with no windfall and no raise and nothing changing except what you can see. The first move was never a payment. It was looking at the number for 60 seconds without saying anything cruel to yourself. That is where this started in episode 1, and it is still where it starts, and it costs nothing. Everything else is downstream of that 1 minute. And if you are somewhere in the middle, plan running, balance falling, month 9 approaching, and the novelty long gone, then the useful thing to know is that the boring stretch you are in is not a sign that it is failing. It is the sign that it is working. Nothing about this is supposed to feel dramatic from here on. Keep the payment flat, do not take the discount when the statement offers you one, and let it be dull. So that is the series. 6 mechanisms, 1 loop, and 1 line cut through it. Tell me in the comments which episode landed hardest for you, and if you are at 0, or you get there, come back and tell me what you redirected the payment to. I genuinely want to read those. This has been education, not financial credit or legal advice. And every figure in this series was a round illustration, rather than a quote from any real product. Thank you for staying with it to the end, and I mean that. This was a series about the uncomfortable half of money, the half that does not fit in a spreadsheet, and choosing to look at that instead of away from it is genuinely the whole thing. Nobody makes you do that part. Go and set up the transfer. I will see you in the next one.